Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Hear Us Now, a panel discussion and community forum on anti-Asian racism and the experience of BUSD's Asian American community. My name is Anna Vasudev, and I'm a member of the Berkeley School Board. I'll be your host and moderator this evening. I'm not sure how many of you know, but in March of this year, following the brutal attack against Asian Americans in Atlanta, Georgia, I felt a sense of urgency to pass a resolution denouncing hate crimes and bigotry towards our AAPI community in BUSD. I work closely with my colleagues on the California Latino School Board Association, many of whom are ethnic studies professors, to ensure that this resolution denouncing hate crimes against our AAPI community was passed not just in Berkeley, but throughout districts in the state of California. We have a saying in Spanish that says, hoy por ti, mañana por mí. And this is what we're feeling today. We are stronger when we work together. And what we're seeing now is that we have an urgent moment and an urgent time for solidarity. We were able to pass BUSD's resolution denouncing hate crimes against our AAPI community due to the hard work of many people, including Mike Chang, our city auditor, Jenny Wong, who is here in our audience tonight, and the president of our school board, Ty Alper, who also shared a sense of urgency in putting mechanisms in place to protect BUSD's AAPI community during this terrible time. I also want to thank our district staff and our superintendent for moving quickly to pass this resolution and also sharing that same sense of urgency. As I've said before, many times throughout our board meetings this year, this is not just the COVID-19 pandemic, but what we're really seeing right now is a pandemic of white supremacy. Through this resolution that we just passed in BUSD, we committed ourselves as a school district to denounce hate crimes, hateful rhetoric, and hateful acts against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and work to ensure that the AAPI student community feels safe and welcome, both during the pandemic and beyond. However, I know the real power of our resolution doesn't come from just a document that lives on our website. It comes from events like this, the event that we're hosting tonight, when we're authentically engaging with our AAPI community. I'm honored to be your moderator tonight, and I'm also honored just to step back, to listen, and to learn. I'm going to work hard, and I hope that many people here who are not Asian American will be working hard to learn how to be better allies. I'd also like to thank the amazing new group of BUSD AAPI parents, teachers, and staff and students who worked with the school district to put this event together. In particular, I'd like to thank Charlene Chang, Angela Bao, Mike Chang, and Gavin Tachibana for their tireless efforts to put together today's amazing panel. I can't wait for you to listen to them. If you have not heard of the new BUSD AAPI Parents Group, we'll include their contact information in the chat. And if you're a member of BUSD's AAPI community, we hope you'll contact them and get involved. This is the first of many panels. Tonight, we'll also be hearing from 6 members of BUSD's Asian American community, students, parents, teachers, and staff. We're also really honored to have Professor Kitaria Associate Professor of Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies at UC Berkeley. These panelists will be talking both about the serious national crisis over the past year of cases of anti-Asian racism in the form of discrimination, harassment, and violence during the pandemic. They'll also discuss the historical roots of hate and racism against people of Asian descent in the United States. This violence, unfortunately, is not new. They'll be talking about how we, the BUSD community, can be better at supporting our Asian American community. With that, I'll leave the next remarks to our superintendent, Brent Stevens, and also to our Title IX coordinator and compliance officer, Stephen Jimenez-Robb, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure that all of our students feel protected. Thank you, Superintendent Stevens and Stephen Jimenez-Robb, for being here tonight.
Thank you very much, Director Vasudev. I as well want to extend my welcome to all of our participants this evening. Berkeley Unified School District is a community made up of many smaller communities, many individuals. One of the hallmarks of our culture, the one that we strive to attain every day, is that we are inclusive, that we honor difference, and that we're able to listen to each other and learn from one another. There are moments in our community when we need to grow together, to deepen our practice, to show our respect, and to defend one another. And this evening is an instance of exactly what I hope will be that type of growth. We learn together when we're able to listen, when we're able to respect each other's voices, and when we take time to uplift voices that are too often not heard in our community, in our state, and in our country. And this evening is an example, again, of the kind of instance that I hope will lead to growth and learning, and at its very best, to healing within our community. So thank you again for being here, and very special thanks to all of our panelists and organizers. We're really proud to count you now as our new body of friends here in Berkeley Unified, and very much look forward to our partnership and our work together over the coming years. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Stephen Jimenez-Robb. Stephen is the supervisor of our office. We call it our Office of Civil Rights. It's our Title IX office, and he is in charge both of education and enforcement of civil rights statutes here in the Berkeley Unified.
Good evening, everyone. I am very excited to be here tonight. My name is Stephen Jimenez-Robb, and I am the Title IX coordinator with the District Civil Rights and Compliance Office for the Berkeley Unified School District. The District Civil Rights and Compliance Office is committed to educating our school communities on the history of harassment and discrimination perpetrated against the AAPI community, and to help raise awareness on their significant contributions to American society. I am looking forward to collaborating with the AAPI community on policies, awareness campaigns, and training for our educational communities in order to create safe learning environments for our students, employees, parents, and stakeholders. I am really excited and optimistic about the work ahead, and I am very confident that together we can accomplish our goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen and Superintendent Stevens, for your warm comments and great welcome. Now I'd like to turn this over to Charlene Chang. Charlene is a representative of our newly formed BUSD AAPI group that helped organize tonight's forum. She's a new friend. I'm so honored, Charlene, to be hosting this with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, so much. And we're so honored to have you here today as our moderator. I'll make it real brief because we have such a great program ahead. So here we are, the district's first ever forum, community forum on anti-Asian racism. And I hope it's the first of many similar to this. And I also hope we get to all be in person together next time. It's great to see all of you on the screen. I'm just welcoming and feeling all the support from all of you out there who we cannot see in person now, but we hope to one day soon. And we really appreciate everybody who has shown up tonight to support. Real quickly, people wanted to, some people had asked for a little background on how this group that is not formally named yet, but it's what we're calling the BUSD AAPI group got formed. And we were formed last month, actually March, after the Atlanta shootings. And we will be hearing more about that later. But there are two parents in particular, Joyce Pisonat and Amy Fujimoto, who had very much noticed that shortly after the shooting, there was overall silence from district leaders. And this was after a year of the pandemic, which was filled with anti-Asian racist attacks and harassment against our community. There was silence during the year, and there was silence during, after the shootings. And that silence hurt. And instead of silence, there should have been outrage. Instead of silence, there should have been solidarity. So they mobilized parents, teachers, and staff, and community members and allies to sign a letter. We got 400 signatures in 48 hours, calling for district leaders to do better, to support more, to call it out, to make a statement. And I am happy to report we have had many meetings so far with Dr. Stevens and Mr. Jimenez-Robb and Anna and others who have been so supportive and listening and genuinely caring and saying that they're ready to listen and learn. And this forum is an outcome, one outcome. There's going to be support around professional development for teachers. There's going to be moments and times for us as a community, Asian American and Pacific Islander community, to have input around K-12 ethnic studies. So a lot of exciting stuff is in store, and it wouldn't have been possible without all of you. And I just want to say real quickly, this crisis is happening every day, every week, as we have just witnessed in the news. Just within a week in San Francisco alone, the attacks on two women who could be our own grandmothers, the attack on a young father who was pushing his 1-year-old in a stroller, attacked out of nowhere for no reason except for the look of his face, and because he and others who look like him are wrongly being blamed for the pandemic. So it's a serious moment, and I'm glad that our district is taking it seriously and that all of you are here to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charlene, for those powerful words and for putting it into context. And I agree, we're stepping up to the plate. We can be better allies. We want to be better allies. And, this work is really hard. And I'm really glad that we're in it, because I think it'll make us a stronger and a more resilient district. So thank you to all the advocates for supporting us in this work. I'd like to start off right now, before we get into our panel, by looking at a short video from one of our own instructors, David Mai, instructional media tech teacher at Berkeley High. Thank you, David.
The recent acts of violence against the Asian American community has exposed the hate and biases embedded in our communities.
We've all seen the photos of our elders being pushed to the ground, being beaten and being bruised. And I know, like so many, the first thought that went through my mind was, what if that was my grandparents? What if that was my popola, my gongong?
I am saddened by our elders being attacked. I am saddened by what has happened in Atlanta. And I am saddened by all the communities of color that are affected by racism. Is this what it means to be Asian American youth right now? But we as youth have a chance to build our future, to raise our voices, and to demand change.
I just want to acknowledge the pain and anger and fear that our community is dealing with right now. And of course, I mean the tragedy in Atlanta where 8 people were targeted and murdered, 6 of whom were Asian women, and the overall escalation of anti-Asian hate and violence throughout this past year during the pandemic. And I just want to say, this is not new to the pandemic. Anti-Asian hate has been around for a really, really long time, and we're just seeing a lot of the culmination of a lot of it in the media. And so I'm here to let you know that whatever feelings you have right now, and I'm speaking really specifically to the Asian American and Pacific Islander students, staff, and their families in our community, your feelings are valid.
There have been horrific acts of violence targeting AAPI people happening around the country, but I also think of the quieter struggle that many young AAPIs face as they navigate rejection, invisibility, and microaggressions. It is time that we begin to see them so they know that they are loved and appreciated. It is time that we begin to educate them on their histories so they can feel empowered. It is time that we give them space and platforms to share their stories, because their stories matter and because their stories tell the truth about this country, and we need to begin listening.
What I was told was that the cavalry is not coming, that it's going to be young people who change the face and the heartbeat of a nation. The young people who organized us today to come out are asking us to shine a mirror to ourselves, and some might say this is the choir. Well, I'll say choirs need to sing louder.
Hi, my name is Miyabi and I am in 8th grade. When I hear about anti-Asian racism incidents, it makes me sad and scared. One of the best things to do to help someone out who has been subjected to anti-Asian racism is to be an ally, helping that person, whether it means going to the authorities or just being there by their side. Either way, it makes a big difference.
What a powerful video. And, I'm so glad that we started off with just the powerful images of our youth really leading the way. I know that I'm excited to hear from our students later on in this panel, but what an amazing video, what a historic moment, and how powerful it is to hear our young people really stand up and to fight for an education system that reflects them, right? And so, yeah, no more invisibility. So thank you for starting with that video. Now I'd like to introduce Professor who is a political scientist and associate professor and coordinator of the Asian American and Asian Diaspora Studies program in the Department of Ethnic Studies at UC Berkeley. Her research and teaching center on migration, refugee, and diaspora studies, with a particular focus on Asia and Asian American communities. She's also an active member of the Berkeley community. Professor my first question for you is kind of just a high-level question. Can you please provide a brief explanation of why we saw an increase in anti-Asian racism in the United States over the past year? And can you help us place what's happening now in a historical context? And I know it's kind of a big question, so feel free to talk about your research broadly, but help us understand like what's happening now and the bigger picture.
Thank you so very much for that very, very important question. I'll try to do justice to it because it is indeed a very, very complex question. Well, as you know, the anti-Asian racism and violence that we're witnessing today is a present crisis that has a longer and deeper roots in US history. And in essence, it began in the early years of Asian migration to the United States. Asian labor was needed and sought after, but once Asians came to be seen as actual or potential economic threat, they were subjected to discrimination and persecution, and on multiple fronts, from exclusionary policies to murder. And so there was the attempt, first of all, to deny entry or future entry into the United States once it was perceived that the community has grown to a certain point and has become a threat. And that, that the denial came through targeted policies such as the Chinese Exclusion Acts that you may have read about beginning in 1882, but that it culminated in the outright ban of immigration from Asia in 1924. And those exclusionary policies were then coupled with measures to undercut the livelihood of those already here. And so you would have the poll tax that affected only Chinese business because they were the only ones who you would use the shoulder poles, to carry the goods. The denial of the right to own land, the denial of the right to access the courts and to legal protection. And so those discriminatory policies were then accompanied by physical attacks against Asian bodies and properties, such as the mass lynching of Chinese residents in Los Angeles in 1871, the attacks against Filipino farm workers in Watsonville, California in 1930, that then spread to other American cities. And again, if you think that, well, perhaps citizenship would protect us, certainly citizenship did not protect Asians in the United States, given the internment of Japanese American citizens during World War II. But again, the tragedy is that this was not just in the distant past. In the wake of mass resettlement of refugees from Southeast Asia, there was the shooting that some of you may remember at Cleveland Elementary School in Stockton in 1989. The shooter targeted that particular elementary school because of the Southeast Asian presence, and all 5 children who were killed were Southeast Asians. And then subsequently, you have attacks against South Asians and Muslim-looking people. Not sure what that means, but again, Muslim-looking people after 9/11, and that continues in various forms today. And now we have the resurgence of violence in the context of the pandemic. And what you see is that one of the threads connecting all of these historical moments is the notion of the perpetual foreigner. That also carries with it the notion of the perpetual potential threat. But racialized and gendered violence against Asians in the US, I would argue, is also an extension of US militarism in Asia that was shored up by ideologies based on notions of racial hierarchy and white supremacy. So you have the Philippine-American War, you have the Korean War, the Vietnam War, quote unquote, because it also affected Laos and Cambodia as well. And in fact, many Americans first encountered Asians in those contexts, right? The Vietnam War, the first televised war, brought into American homes the images of jungles and brothels. And so you have the dehumanization of Asian lives on one hand, and the hypersexualization and the moral corruption of Asian women. And so again, so it's not just racialized violence, it's also gendered violence that you saw in Atlanta. And that's something that is not sufficiently underscored, is the gendered element. And these imaginaries, right, these stereotypes stick. So to the question of, well, what gives them life, a new life and a sense of virulence today is the recent political climate, right? The inflammatory rhetoric about the pandemic, with COVID-19 being referred to as the China virus and Kung flu, all of which evoked and provoked the imagery of the yellow peril. And it was this incendiary language that was picked up and amplified in many corners, right? Not just politicians, but the media and eventually the public as well. Some of you may have seen a recent study by the UC San Francisco that found that Trump's first tweet with the term China virus triggered a precipitous rise in anti-Asian hashtag on Twitter. And so, of course, that the number of hate crimes in 2020 increased by, something like 150% from 2019. But, we don't need studies to show the connection, right? The attacks on Asians were accompanied often by racist references, very clear racist references to the virus. Asians were sprayed on the metro with sanitizer, what appeared to be some liquid. And just a few weeks ago, an Asian family in San Jose was verbally assaulted by a man, at the front door who yelled, "You brought COVID-19, communist China, you effing commies." Jeremy Lin, the basketball player, was called coronavirus during a game. But it was also the tension in US-China relations and the pandemic engendered economic retraction and widespread frustration and anxiety among Americans. And then one thing that history does show us is that when there is a public health crisis or an economic downturn, people look for scapegoats. And with this pandemic, it was both, right? Public health crisis and economic retraction. And so here, the national rhetoric presents a ready-made scapegoat, China/Asia. And when you pair that with the fact that in the popular imagination, people of Asian ancestry remains a perpetual foreigner and a potentially dangerous one, and that there's no distinction that's made between a government and its people, or between an Asian national and Asian American, or even among different Asian groups, you have this perilous situation where everyone who looks Asian becomes identified as a potential enemy. Some of you may remember Vincent Chin, a Chinese American who was murdered in 1982 by two white auto workers who were laid off in Detroit because they thought he was Japanese. And they had blamed Japan at that time and the trade wars with the US for their job loss. And then finally, I just make a final point here. The model minority myth that has long plagued Asian Americans, right? And that allow for the dismissal of Asian American concerns. There is this unfounded but plaguing belief that Asian Americans do not experience any challenges, including racism. And it is truly disconcerting that even with a simple House resolution recently that was put forth to condemn all forms of anti-Asian sentiment as related to COVID-19, you have 164 Republicans voting against it and 20 others not voting at all. So what does that say about our nation? And what does that say about where Asian Americans fit in all of this and into this democracy? Thank you.
Thank you, Professor That was so powerful and so on point. Like this idea of that perpetual foreigner, right? We'll never get out of it. We need to break that, right? And that's something that I think, really for Latinos, we feel very strongly too, right? Like this idea that you're a perpetual foreigner, right? And it's so hurtful. And the context of the model minority myth, right? How it serves to silence the Asian American experience. And so thank you so much for those poignant comments. And even though we have a new government, the impacts of that inflammatory language stay, and they hurt and they sting, and they're there because if they weren't there, we wouldn't have two Asian American grandmothers attacked this week so brutally in San Francisco in the middle of the day, right? And so thank you, Professor
Thank you very much.
Now we're going to zoom in a little bit into the experience of, people in BUSD, and our parents, our students, right? Like to zoom in a little bit on how this is impacting our school community, right? People that we see when we drop off our children, right? Let's come in, let's zoom in and look a little bit at, what we're seeing in our schools right now. And so, with that, I want to introduce Julie, who's a parent in BUSD, who's a parent at Ruth Actie and at King Middle School. And from Julie, maybe I'll just let you explain, Julie Kono Manning, your experience and your family's long history of culturally affirming programs here in Berkeley, because I think you'll do more service than I will to that. And so I would love for you to just explain. You have really deep Berkeley roots, so maybe just give a little bit of background, and then I'll have a question for you after you. That way you don't have to feel like you have to answer the question first. So maybe just give a little bit of background into your deep Berkeley roots.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, first of all, to everyone for putting this together and having me tonight. I feel a huge responsibility being one of the parent panelists. But yes, I was born and raised in Berkeley. I went to Ruth Actie when it was Jefferson. My father went to King when it was Garfield. My son is at King now. My mother was a Berkeley Unified School teacher, first grade. She probably taught some of you or your kids for over 20 years. So I feel deeply connected to the community and to Berkeley. And I guess I should speak about the Japanese American summer program that my mom and a group of her friends put together when I was in kindergarten, basically, because they wanted to bring Japanese and Japanese American heritage to their children because they knew they weren't going to get it anywhere else. So they started this program. It started a summer camp, 18 kids, and it's still going. And because in 1978, they knew it wasn't going to be in the school taught in the school district. It's still going on today. We still have about 80 to 100 kids every summer. It's 100% parent run. We don't do it for profit. We do it because parents are seeking us out, wanting this programming for their children. And being part of this coalition, I've learned that similar programs exist in the Filipino, the Thai, the Chinese, the Korean communities that are right here in our neighborhood. And it shouldn't be just for our kids, teaching our kids heritage. Like, if we want to truly cultivate an anti-racist community and society, this should be programming for all kids in our community.
Thank you, Julie. I couldn't agree with you more. I remember when I was in middle school, I went to Herbert Hoover Middle School in San Francisco, and you had the option of taking Japanese, and how great it was for a girl from the mission to learn Japanese. Don't quiz me, I don't remember, but in 8th grade, just how wonderful it was and how that opened up my worldview. So I share that sentiment too. My question for you, Julie, is how has this past year of increased anti-Asian racism affected you and your family and others that you know in our BUSD parent community?
Mm-hmm. So when I was thinking about the question, anti-Asian racism, yes. In the media, we have seen an increase of anti-Asian rhetoric and horrible acts of anti-Asian hate crimes. And a lot of these things that I've seen have been against first generation or non-native English speaking members of our community. And I can imagine up until this point, a lot of them have gone unreported, probably for the same reasons that my grandparents and my father faced, and 200,000 other Japanese and Japanese Americans faced during World War II, when the government incarcerated them against their will in horse barracks in the middle of the desert, behind barbed wire, under armed guards. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then obviously your American history has failed you. But basically forcing them to assimilate to white America in order to even have a veil of safety, veil of protection in the community. But the reasons I feel that a lot of these things, why this is maybe on the increase or the rise, or it's new, the language barriers, people not understanding their rights, fear of immigration status, fear of retribution in the community. So I think it's just the whole aspect of things getting caught on tape, being freely distributed by the public now, things actually being categorized as hate crimes, because I heard recently from Prashant that Berkeley doesn't even necessarily have a bucket for hate crimes when they categorize their crimes on their public crime blotter. And again, getting more coverage in the media. So yes, we have been seeing an increase in overt race-based hate crimes, but anti-Asian racism is nothing new. If you are Asian or Asian American in this country or community, you are already a target of anti-Asian racism. You're basically born into it, whether it's overt or covert through microaggressions or macroaggressions, all by the way of mocking, harassment, prejudice, sexualization, and disingenuous stereotypes from your peers, from the community, on TV, movies, in the news, social media, in books, and in literature, all while being labeled, the model minority. Okay, sorry, you asked how it's affected my family. My mother, the wonderful woman I referenced earlier, Berkeley Unified School District teacher, served the community. She had a talk with my children a couple weeks ago, my children, her grandchildren, about what they should do if she's attacked while they're out on a walk with her. And they take walks every day. So obviously it hurts very deeply that my mother doesn't feel a sense of safety in the community that she lives in and has dedicated, her life to through public service.
That's very painful. Thank you so much, Julie, for sharing that
Thank
story.
you.
I know that we're hearing from a lot of our Asian American elders that are feeling that way, and it's unacceptable. But thank you for sharing your history and your deep Berkeley roots and your family's experience here. Now we're going to zoom in a little more into the student experience. And I'm so glad to have here Jessica Hipona from Willard. And Jessica, I'm going to read just a couple of fun tidbits about you, that you love music, acting, singing, playing the piano, and that in your free time, you love to read and write songs on your keyboard. So we're so honored to have our students. We love hearing directly from you what do you want out of your educational experience here? And so my question for you, Jessica, is why do you think there should be more awareness and education about the Asian American community in our Berkeley schools?
Well, first of all, I think in general, the more we know about different cultures and communities and the more we understand each other, the more we can accommodate each other's needs. Our culture in particular is more obscure and less talked than others, and I believe that we should all be equally understood and known about, because then we can understand the impact of our actions and words on people, and especially actions and words that are regarding their cultural background or community. When I was in first grade, okay, let me go from the beginning. Every year I have a tradition where around Lunar New Year's, I will come to school dressed up in traditional clothing of my culture and give a presentation on our culture and how we celebrate Lunar New Year's. And after that, a group of students that began to call me Chinese girl for a couple of months. And first of all, I have nothing against them at all, because I genuinely do not think that it really was their fault. But now looking back on it, it's interesting to see that sort of name calling and that idea of name calling, or just the possibility that you could do that to somebody, was already in their heads at 6 or 7. And I think that really shows a lot about what we're being taught right now, or what we're not being taught. And I do know that the community that we're surrounded by, and these people's parents or teachers, they all like really supported anti-racism and things like that. So I don't think it came from them. I think it came from just growing up in a world where these ideas are so present in our everyday lives. Like, for example, small microaggressions that happen every day. For example, in a restaurant, a white family being served before a colored family
because of their race, regardless of when they came, how much food they ordered, or whatever. And these things happen way too much, way too often in my everyday life, and I see them happen too often. And I think that's just a result of the lack of knowledge and education around our culture and these things. In third grade, I did a project on the Transcontinental Railroad. And I learned that about 15 to 20,000 Chinese immigrants came to work on this railroad to supposedly unite our nation. And around 4,000 of those died. What's striking to me, though, is that if I hadn't studied that for my own personal project that year, I probably wouldn't have known that still. And that's it's just an interesting thing to see right now. And we see this underrepresentation in our everyday lives. Like, for example, every year we learn about different activists such as the amazing Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huertas, countless others. And this does not go to say that they are not important and that they shouldn't be talked about. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that the absence of representation and education about those types of people, such as Yuri Kochiyama from our culture, is very interesting to see.
Thank you, Jessica.
I also want to, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I also wanted to add just a small thing to the Chinese girl calling. It was ended very quickly by my first grade teacher that year. And she understood these things and she knew about it. And I think that's really important to have, especially in our educators, for them to understand that. And that just all goes to say that I want us to learn in our curriculum and in our education that we are a part of history. We were here and we still are. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, you know, I want all our students to see themselves reflected in our curriculum. And, you know, just 2 weeks ago, my board colleagues and I passed, you know, funding for a more comprehensive ethnic studies program, K-12. But again, it's just the beginning. Like right now, we're just at the beginning, right? And I think sharing your story, that what happened to you in first grade, right? And you're in middle school and that experience stayed with you and it's deep and it hurt. And you still remember it so vividly, right? I think it just shows how important it is that we start ethnic studies early. I know it's K-12, but you know, next round of funding, hopefully it'll be preschool. Like it's that early, right? Like those experiences start so young, and there's a real void in making sure that our education is culturally affirming for all the various cultures in BUSD. So thank you, Jessica. I totally understand what you're saying. And I agree with a lot of the recommendations that you made. Next, I'd like to introduce one of our BUSD educators. Again, bringing this, you know, back to our community. How this is a conversation about how we can improve. And so I want to introduce David, who is a student and a welfare attendance specialist at Berkeley High School. Maybe you can say a little bit about your work, David, you know, trying to create positive school culture through restorative justice. And my question to you, if you could give a little intro just about your work at Berkeley High, and then answer, how do you think the issue of racist behavior should be addressed in our schools, right? Like, I'd love to hear just about your expertise at the high school and how can we improve, David? How can we do better?
Yeah, sure. So the work I do at Berkeley High School is really around trying to bridge the gap between individuals who are having conflict, right? Whether that's teacher-student, student-student, and to some degree teacher-teacher as well, but not really. So anyway, so the work that I do really is around trying to build understanding between people and to look at how things have transpired to bring harm to one person or the other. Many times it's actually harm to both individuals. So the bulk of my work really has to do with trying to get people to understand that it's the relatedness that we have between each other that really kind of is the root of conflict. And once we can look at that, centralize that as key to our happiness, our existence, and our well-being, then we can really kind of start to move forward with similar interests, a united interests as a school, as a community, and as a world. That being said, with regards to the ways that schools can address racist behaviors, I mean, I think you can think about it at many different levels. The first being interpersonal, right? So on an interpersonal level, I mean, I personally would recommend trying to engage with that person to educate them. I actually learned in a workshop that the best way to kind of get through to somebody when they make a slight towards you is, if possible, engage them in a manner that is assertive, meaning you confront them, but not in a manner that is aggressive, right? And the way that you talk to them is you talk to them as though they are a person that's going to be in your community long term. You don't other them, but you try to talk to them in a way that kind of like acknowledges the fact that, hey, listen, I'm a person and you could be a person in my life. You're not the other. Just because you make me feel like the other, you're not the other to me. And so to educate from that space, I think is very powerful because it kind of disarms the person with all of their walls, right? So that's one thing, just interpersonally. But like on a larger scale, I do think that, what the Stop AAPI Hate organization has done, what with the reporting protocols is definitely something that should be mimicked by our district, right? These racist behaviors happen quite often in our district, and a lot of them don't go reported. What Jessica stated was racist in nature, was a racist behavior, microaggressions, things like that. A lot of the stuff doesn't necessarily come into line with a behavioral incident, right? However, it does hurt. There is harm that's caused. And so I think that those should be documented. People should feel free to, inform things, inform school administrators and district about those things. Maybe a dashboard could be created to develop an index to see how it is that we're doing as a school, as a district, to collect data and see how that data can then drive us to doing better, right? We've committed to bringing on ethnic studies curriculum, right? And maybe that data that's on that dashboard can then drive how that ethnic studies curriculum is kind of like delivered in the classroom with current data, so that it makes it very relevant, especially to the folks in high school and even through middle school. That real-time data about what's really going on in our community. So I mean, that's basically those two things: engaging people as though they're a part of your community or have the possibility to be in a relationship with you long term, and also creating a form, a reporting mechanism, so that people at the district and school levels can really have their finger on the pulse of what's going on with our students.
Thank you so much, David. A lot of what you said really also resonated with me. And I know with our city auditor, Jenny Wong, when we worked on the resolution in March, she was really intentional about including a line on reporting, right? And that's something that we still have to build out. I look forward to working with Stephen Jimenez Rob and this parent group to kind of build that out. But I think it's so, you're speaking the language that the board speaks too. Like we're all, metrics and tracking and improving, right? Really this is about pushing ourselves as a district. And so I really love the idea of a dashboard and just transparency on reporting, right? And measuring like how we're doing, right? If we're rolling out a new ethnic studies program, what's the impact of it, right? How are we seeing change? And so I think this is the time, before we roll something out, to be really intentional and thoughtful about it. And a lot of your feedback is really important and really resonated with me. So thank you, David.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And I don't know if you can, we'll share out in the video, but I think for people that want to get involved on the reporting side, I think that's something the group has expressed an interest in. So, definitely email the group if you want to get involved in that later. Next, I'd like to, sorry for speeding up because I know that we're short on time. We want to get to the Q&A, but I'd love to introduce Prashant, who is another one of our parents here, parent panelists, and so honored to have you here, Prashant. You're a parent of a student at King Middle School. And you've been instrumental in bringing Indian cultural traditions to our school, which is so important. My husband's Indian, my two boys are Indian, and I think it's so important to highlight. Right, we're in the Bay Area, the wonderful and the richness of Indian culture. So thank you for your contributions. My question for you is, how do you envision the prevention of hate towards the Asian American community? And you can talk about it, within the context of our schools or more broadly as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Director Vasudev, Superintendent Stephens, and everyone who put this together. Thank you. Namaste. And it's a great question. And I think I'm glad that I'm coming last because the panelists before me have spoken to this to a certain extent. And I think I'm going to heavily borrow from them, right? So I think, what I am going to take is take a little different angle on this and say what were the good experiences for me, right? And then I think it's a difficult task for you guys, Director Vasudev and Superintendent Stephen, to kind of pick that up and convert that into some policies that then you can take it to the school, right? So I think a few things I'm going to say is that I think to me, when we say that we want to prevent hate, we are also saying that we want to increase acceptance, right? Increase the welcoming atmosphere where that, like Professor Om said, like that perpetual foreigner feeling kind of goes away. So how do we do that, right? And I think there are like many ways, and I'm sure people can write thesis on this, but I think couple of things, the couple of ways I experienced it in Ruth Acti, where I got a chance to go with kids of, Julie and Gavin. So one is at the personal level, right? What I always remember from, Ruth Acti days is that whenever we were, on the yard, or if we went to like some school meetings, there were always some parent, who would just say hi, right. So, I remember even where the welcoming fair, we went there was like the principal and the PTA directors who were standing there, and, they talked to us for a few minutes. So right from day one, we felt that, okay, we are part of this community. So like Dave was saying, that creating that welcoming atmosphere where anybody feels like, okay, they are welcome, right? Like both kids, who are, Asian parents, and then, other community members. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think that we have to go a little bit beyond that. I think what helped us is when we could relate to other community members, and when other community members are related with us, right? I think one example I would like to give is we always used to invite some of the school members to Holi parties and Diwali parties in our house. And then we also got invited to some Christmas parties and Thanksgiving parties. So I'm not saying that's the only way, but I'm giving that as an example, where you relate, right? So when you relate to that Asian family, or your white family or any family as person to person, I think that acceptance and welcomingness increases so much that hate kind of pretty much reduces, right? So that's, I think, at a personal level. But also I see that at the institutional level, we can do a couple of things. And Jessica, you so well said that, we need to look at our education and see what we are learning and what we are not learning, right? There is so much about the Asian cultures and religions and our background and our histories that are taught in the textbooks. And then, I'm not an academic expert here, but of course our kids and our community are really not learning a lot, right? Or the right thing. So we, it's up to us as a community to kind of bring that up to a great level where everybody gets both understanding, acceptance, and welcomingness. We can differ and we can debate about different things, but we can at least accept each other as the same level, right? Not like me and a foreigner kind of so that's one thing. Other thing I would like to also see is relate in a different way. One example, I mean, my daughter keeps telling me, because she's in 7th grade now and 8th grade is supposed to be that Washington DC trip, right? That happens, and which is also expensive. um, that we can create like this similar trips, like locally. Berkeley is a rich, I mean, we sit fortunately in a place, I mean, there is a Hindu temple right like in the middle of Berkeley, right? There is a Sikh temple right in El Sobrante. There are Buddhist monasteries here, right? And that's like, maybe we can take the trips to these kind of places where we see people like, more Asian people, uh, you know, uh, who are, in a particular, dressed in a particular way, right? Praying or like coming together in a particular way. I think that will be very enriching for the kids. When I was growing up in India, we were constantly immersed into like people from different religion, North Indian, South Indian, East Indians, right? People speaking Tamil, Marathi, Hindi, Gujarati, woo, 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 right? But we came out of it very well because we learned how to both accept, right? Recognize people for their differences and then respect that difference and then relate to them by participating like, in Eid and then in Mahavir Jayanti and Baisakhi and like so many different festivals, right? More holidays than you can count. So I think that would be really good. So I think my, like, Director Vasudev, you asked, like, how can we prevent? So I think my like in my limited way of thinking about it is that we can definitely, increase the welcomingness and acceptance, both like, at an institutional level and at the school community level, increase the level of education, and then, definitely, put some policies where we can go out and deliberately relate with many Asian communities. So I think that's like, that will increase the acceptance and knowledge. I mean, that's my limited way. But yeah, thanks everyone again. I think it was beautiful, to hear. And if I reference somebody and didn't mention them, I'm sorry. And, but forgive me, but, thank you for kind of giving me the background for this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant. I thought it was really beautiful how you put that in a really practical context. And as you were describing the idea of, being in school with more holidays than you can count, I think it's true. In India, it's absolutely true. There are so many, you celebrate every little, there's always a festivity. You're catching up to all the different festivities when you go, because there's another one. And it's about embracing, different subcultures and different languages. There's thousands of languages, and that incredible richness, and just, reaching out to each other and saying like, hey, have you ever heard of this? Is important for my family. Have you heard of this, and what's important to your family? And I really appreciate the very practical way in which you answered that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Next, we're going to go to one of our students and touch a little bit on just the tremendous amount of advocacy that's been happening now, that's been student-led. And so we're really, really excited to have Abby here, who is one of the organizers of the Bay Area AAPI protest in early April, which I heard was amazing. And Abby, I would love for you just to describe, your advocacy. And can you tell us why you and your other students decided to organize this protest? And did you ever think it'd get as big as it did?
Definitely. Well, first off, thanks so much for having me. Before I say anything, I just want to recognize that I'm just one of many people who made this happen. I'm just one of many students and youth who feel the same anger and passion as I do. I was lucky enough to be invited to, come speak here, but it isn't just me. There's a whole bunch of us. So just making sure that, we all know I'm not just the only, speaker here. And definitely I think that, it came about my friend, who I've known for a really long time. She called me up after the Atlanta shootings, and we really just had this moment of like 45 minutes on the phone of just us exasperated and just and done and we didn't know what to do. And especially, as youth, we don't have as much to do. We don't have jobs that we can, really have a big platform on. We don't have, we have student leadership, but we don't have city power. There's a lot that we were just very like, what do we do? Where do we go from here? And came the idea of a student-led protest where we could invite young people like ourselves to come out and show that we have a voice and we want to take action and we need more. And so we really branded together, and we got a group of our friends from Oakland, from SF, from all over, from in Berkeley with Berkeley High, and we really band together, and we sat down in 24 hours. We got it all worked out, and from there it was just a lot of phone calls and a lot of rushing to get it in. We had about we were at first, my whole thing was, wow, it'd be really cool if we got 50 people to show up, and then it was like, oh my God, like 100 people just RSVP'd, and then the next day it was like 150, and then by the time it was there, it was around 400 people that showed up, and it was just crazy to see how fast it grew from what I thought people, only about 50 people would show up, and it would all be like Asian students, because that's usually how it is. And so, as the numbers grew and as the diversity grew, it really blossomed into what it turned out to be. So I couldn't have been more grateful for everyone who showed up.
Well, awesome. Thanks, Abby. Thanks for leading the way. When you look in history at some of our most important political movements, they're often led by students. And I think, your work is a real testament to that. So thank you so much, Abby. It's 8 o'clock, but we're going to stay 15 more minutes. We have, a couple of, 15 minutes for the Q&A, and please join me in giving a round of applause. I can't see you, but I know that you're doing it in your homes for our wonderful panelists. And I'm just gonna, go through their Q&A and ask a couple of questions. And if you feel like you want to answer it for our panelists, if you could just, maybe raise your hand, and then I'll call on you. Does that work? You can use the raise hand icon. Great. And so I'm going to kick it off with, how do we build, not just insert, Asian American history in the K-12 school curriculum, but also create the space for deeper race analysis? How can we ensure that the inclusion and contributions and experiences of all cultures are included in the curriculum taught in our schools at all grade levels, and not just as an elective or special week semester-long study? So this is really about embedding our Asian American history in our curriculum in a more profound way. So I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at that. Looks like Abby. All right, Abby.
Yeah, I just want to, from a student perspective, I think I have a unique way to answer this question. I think it really, at the root of it, starts with sending out forms and asking questions. It really starts with looking at what we do know. What have we learned yet? And then expanding off of that. Start with what we have, and then grow from that and expand. What do kids want to see? I know as an Asian American student, what I want to be put out there and what I want my history to be shown isn't always what we get. So we really want to start asking the questions of people who are going to be learning. What do you want to learn? What do you want to see? It isn't just about what schools want to do or what administrators want to do or in the district, what you guys think is a good idea. It's really about what students have and the perspective that we have and what we want to learn. And I think on top of that, in BUSD alone, we've done a great job of hiring a very diverse teachers, but it really does have to be better overall. We have about less than 2% of our educational workforce is Asian American. And so when students can't see themselves reflected in those teaching them, it creates this barrier of education and curriculum. So now we feel even more left out because of that. So on top of curriculum, just to make sure that we're all feeling included in school, we really have to start looking at the diversity of who we're hiring to teach these things and how we are teaching them. So that's my answer to that question. I'm sure someone else has a more detailed one, but putting out the student perspective for that.
That was powerful, Abby. Please run for school board. And so, thank you. My next question is, I'm concerned that anti-Asian violence shows up in our schools as bullying of Asian students. What is being done to prevent this and to address this? And so I don't know, Stephen, if you want to take that one, it's okay if somebody else wants to take it, but you know, how anti-Asian violence shows up in our schools and what's being done to prevent this and to address this.
First, I want to say I am, really new to Berkeley Unified School District. I was hired in December of 2020, and plus we've been in a pandemic and schools have just recently started to open in the last 3 weeks. From my perspective and where I sit, and just looking at past data over 3 years of the complaints that have come through, and then looking at even current data, of course, I'm not going to see a lot of the anti-Asian bullying and harassment that has been reported in the district. But I could tell you this, moving forward, it's definitely going to be something that we will be looking at, not so much in a reactive way, but in a very proactive way. Part of being on this committee is that hearing all your voices and hearing all your concerns, and how do we take your voice and concerns and do something in the district where we are now having a ethnic studies instructor, what we do around awareness campaigns, how do we highlight the significant contributions of our AAPI community in our curriculum, and then how do we build on that in terms of creating conferences where people can come together, not just members of the AAPI community, but other members of the community who are allies who can come together and continue to have these conversations. Again, I would just like to say I'm new to Berkeley, but I'm very, very willing to put myself out there and to learn as much as I can, and to start having these conversations with school site administrators and create training around this as well, not only for school site administrators, but for counselors, teachers, and creating a student voice, someone like Abigail.
Thank you so much, Stephen. My next question, and I feel like Charlene, you're probably the most poised to answer this, but while this is a wonderful forum and I completely support the program, somebody wrote, there appears to be a complete lack of acknowledgement of the Pacific Islander experience. And I know that was really intentional, and so I think we need to elaborate on that. Where is the Pacific Islander representation and experience? So.
Thank you for that question, and thank you to the person who asked. I meant to say it in my opening statements, but I wanted to move ahead with the program, so I'm glad that I have a chance to speak to that. The newly formed BUSD AAPI group, we had a conversation in that there had been members of the Pacific Islander community in our own district who had come to talk to us about how they wanted to make sure that we were aware of a rather long-standing conversation among Pacific Islanders in not just our community, but around the nation, who have been calling to basically be disaggregate from the AAPI group. The reason being is that the Pacific Islanders, many of them believe that in the grouping of Asian Americans plus Pacific Islanders, their needs and concerns and their specific histories and their specific cultures get for the most part ignored and overlooked and neglected, and that often it's just a phrase, but they don't get centered ever. It's predominantly the Asian Americans are getting centered. So there is this movement, it's not actually that new, to call for the separating. And so we actually trying to do it out of sensitivity, although we didn't get to explain that to everybody. And we are ourselves on a journey, just like many around the country, in trying to navigate this moment that we're in deciding to both be mindful and respectful of the Pacific Islander community and respectful of their wishes, while it is not, formalized or clear in terms of what the term will be and what these, what the groupings will be and when we address these issues. It was clear that when we talked about the pandemic backlash specifically the primary target has been against Asian Americans. And that's why for tonight's event in particular, we felt that it was, that we felt we could feel comfortable with focusing on Asian Americans tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. And I just want to say we passed a resolution in March, to acknowledge the contributions of Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez, but also of Larry Itliong and the Filipino farm workers and their struggles. And we worked with our Pacific Islander educators to do that. I think it's really important that, as we continue to develop our curriculum, that we look, let our Pacific Islander communities lead the way on how they want us to talk about their community, right? And I think, Charlene, you were really intentional. I really appreciated your comments. And I think, making sure that when we're developing curriculum, right, that we're also consulting with our educators, right, if we're talking about the farm workers, how do our Pacific Islanders want that part of their California narrative represented in our curriculum? And so I think, again, we're at the beginning of a journey, and it's a journey that's going to make us a more culturally responsive district. My next question is one that comes up a lot. And I know, especially with recent events in Oakland and in other Bay Area jurisdictions, it has to do with the relationship between our Asian American community and African American community right now. So we have been shown through the media a significant amount of anti-Asian acts of violence carried out by Black African American attackers. How does this sit with the AAPI population? And can we heal both populations of our communities who have been historically supportive of one another? And so I don't know if one of our ethnic studies professors might want to answer that question. It's a complicated question, a very nuanced question, but it's about healing both communities together.
My reception is a little bit problematic, but you're referring to the question about in terms of the intergroup relations. Is that the question? Yes. So I do think that, well, if you really look at it, so much of the what is behind the myth of the model minority was very well designed to divide and conquer, right? And so it's a way of shifting attention away from the structure of inequities and structural racism that affects, many and all of our vulnerable communities, or certainly communities of color. And so by presenting very, very selectively and intentionally certain images, certain misrepresentations of Asian Americans, you're sort of putting, again, the focus on things like cultural values and all the other things that are not on the structural inequities and the structural barriers that keep many of our communities, many of communities of color in general, from accessing fundamental resources, so on. So the first step is to actually understand the forces that keep us apart, that divide us, and to then redirect our attention to the kind of structural and systemic problems that affect, all communities of color, and that is structural racism, obviously, but also the different forms that plays out at multiple level. And to also, again, part of drawing attention to the internal diversity of the Asian American communities is also to be attentive to the disparities that exist among Asian American communities. And if you look at some of the data, again, some mentioned disaggregated data, if you look at the data of some Southeast Asian American communities on educational attainment or healthcare or poverty, they're very close to African Americans and Latinx communities, and less so in terms of other Asian groups. And so once we start to see the realities and we start to take the data apart and see the complexities between the communities, you start to see the commonalities that we share. And I think it's based on those commonalities that we can forge solidarity. And again, going back to what has been said about the importance of knowing history, how our histories intersect, how our communities have walked side by side in partnership and allyship historically, right? So you have many Asian Americans who were very, very involved in the Black Panther movement, and certainly also in civil rights movement, and have been very much at the forefront of some of these issues as well. And so I just wanted to throw that out as a starting point, towards healing is to bridge the understanding of each other and to take apart the myth and all of the kind of falsehood that have kept us apart for far too long.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah, thank you for the way that you answered that question. And I agree, many times these divisions that I see them between our Latinx and our Black community too. These divisions are rooted in white supremacy, right? And the only people that thrive, the only thing that thrives is white supremacy when these divisions exist. So thank you, Professor. My last question, there's so many great questions. And so in the interest of time, this is going to be our last question. But again, first panel, we're going to do this again. And so I'm definitely committed as a board member to doing something like this again. The last question is, how can the school district BHS not only keep conversations about AAPI hate relevant, but also ensure that AAPI students feel safe, represented, and heard without putting pressure on these students to speak for their communities? So I don't know who wants to answer that. Superintendent Stevens, you look eager to answer that one. Maybe you can take it home, Superintendent Stevens.
Thank you for that, Director Vasudev. I'll throw out a few ideas, although I don't represent that I know the correct answer to this. My sense is that this is work that we have to engage in together. This has to be a commitment among our educators, our students, our very articulate students, as well as district administrators, principals, to stay engaged in this dialogue. What I saw this evening is an opportunity to learn from one another, to hear one another. So the idea that more students would have opportunities to listen to panels like this one, to see in curriculum examples of contributions of many communities here in the United States, and then to begin to explore through systematic study the themes that we have been talking about, learning about concepts like hegemony and counter narratives and resistance, and then being able to apply those lenses to a variety of situations that they come across, both in their interactions at school, but also in the way that they're studying. So there's I don't think, a single right answer to this, except to say that we must draw the energy that is in this moment and continue forward together and create more space for dialogue, exactly like the one tonight.
Thank you, Superintendent Stevens. And, I just want to say I'm inspired. I am so grateful for our new parent group that has brought us together. I know it's the beginning of work, but I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and, work with you. I know our district is, I know our superintendent is, I know Stephen is. And just thank you from the bottom of my heart for dedicating your time to being here, to sharing your narratives, to bringing such personal experiences out to our community. We've had nearly 200 participants tonight. So grateful for everyone who took the time to have this conversation, right? That is so timely. Get involved. I think it'll be great to send out a list of resources in the community. So that's something, I don't know if the group wants to work on that, but I'd love to just continue to send out resources. I know we've sent out resources before, but to make sure that our community, our AAPI community, feels supported, right, by their district. This is your district, and we're here to make sure that, Jessica, what happened to you in first grade doesn't happen again to a student, right? Abby, thank you for your advocacy and leading the way, but we want to make sure that we prevent situations so that you don't have to organize the march that you did, and that the march that you organize is really celebrating the AAPI experience. And so, I'm so grateful for everyone that was here. Professor thanks for bringing this in a broader context and really bringing that historical lens, right, which I think is so important. And to all our parents, Prashant, Julie, it's wonderful just to have your on the ground experience. And Julie, thanks for sharing your deep Berkeley roots. And to our educators, Dave, thank you again. And to Charlene, Mike, Angela, and Gavin, who have been in the trenches putting this together, I hope you sleep really proud of yourselves. It's been 2 really long weeks, but look at how many members of the community you brought together tonight. So thank you to my board colleagues. I know some of them have been texting me that are watching. To our city auditor, Jenny Wong, who for me is a mentor, really helping me become a better ally. So thanks everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you everyone so much. Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody who's here attending. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, everybody, for coordinating. Charlene, Kataria, Jessica, Abigail, Stephen, and Dr. Stevens, everybody that has joined. Thanks. Great work.
Thank you so much.
Good night,
And we will continue. First of many. Good night, everyone.
Good night.